A warm welcome to all of you, wherever you're watching us from, on behalf of the Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center. It gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished chair, Professor Dolly Sunny, speakers, and participants who registered for the event. We are glad that you could join us today at the NICE WPC International Conference on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating the New Normal. Today is the third and the last day of the conference, which was inaugurated on 29th of August 2020 by Mr. Pradeep Gyawali, Foreign Minister of Nepal, and Dr. Abdullah Rashid Ahmed, State Minister of Maldives, and other high dignitaries. We have around 150 experts and speakers joining us from 30 different countries who have been delivering their presentations and sharing their expertise with us. This is the 29th session of the conference, and to chair and moderate this session, it's a real pleasure to have Professor Dolly Sunny here with us. Professor Dolly Sunny is a professor of economics at Department of Economics, Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy, University of Mumbai, India. She is also Honorable Director, Western Regional Center, Indian Council of Social Sciences Research. JP Naik Bhavan Vidyanagari, Chairperson, elected Board of Studies, Economic Member, Academic Council Member, RRC. She completed her PhD in economics from University of Mumbai in 1999. She had received publication award for her book titled Women in Leading Profession in the Middle East, a study of Indian immigrants in Bahrain, 2004, from Al Taif, the Kingdom of Bahrain. She has also authored numerous papers and articles and independently written books like Trade Unionism in Informal Sectors, Revisiting the Woodlode, Workers of Rubber Plantation, Crossroads to Unemployment and Empowerment, a study of women in outstanding industries of Mumbai city, women in labor market of Middle East, etc. Thank you.
Thank you for such a generous introduction. So I'm privileged to be here for this conference organized by NIICE and WPC. Of course, from 29th onwards, this conference was going on, and again, this is a 29th section. So the first speaker in this regard is Dr. Vishwajit Mohapatra, Associate Professor of International Relations at NEHU, and he would be speaking on global governance and institutions. Global governance encompasses the totality of institutions, policies, norms and procedures, and initiatives through which the states and their citizens try to bring more predictability, stability, and order to the responses of transactional challenges. I really can't resist, this opportunity to appreciate Dr. Baba Saheb, Rosa Saheb, in organizing such kind of conference and coming out with such themes and subsections. So, and equally the credit goes to the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement also. And again, if you take into consideration of the second topic, it is on India's rising supremacy in COVID-19 era by Hiroshi Sinha. And the third is by Mr. Singh, who is a faculty of Jindal Global University. He would be speaking on COVID-19 and its impact on remittances. Of course, it is a very current topic. Even the second is also a very current topic. And again, another COVID-19 based presentation will be given by Vikas Chandra, who is Assistant Professor of Kashi Naresh Government PG College. So a hearty welcome to all of you. And now shall I request Shairosi Sinha to come out with her presentation? She was here sometime before.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Namaskar, Chair. Thank you, Chair. And I'm really honored to be a part of this extremely intellectual panel. And a very good afternoon to all my, or to the dignitaries present over here, the respected faculty members from various institutions and universities, academicians, and my dear friends. I would take this opportunity to thank the NIICE-WPC for conducting this wonderful mega webinar and giving opportunities to so many academicians from all over the world. So in times of such a crisis, this comes as a ray of hope, sir. We had been working, we had been all involved in domestic work for the past 6 months, and suddenly one academic chance, and it's seriously very positive. So well, today, ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, and you know the time limit, I hope.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So today I'll be speaking a little on India's rising supremacy in the post-COVID era. As we all know that the COVID pandemic has wreaked havoc across the globe and is one of the few episodes in recorded history where all of humanity faces a common existential threat. Within a few months of its discovery, we know that the virus has spread around the world and imperiled not just our health and well-being, but also our social and economic networks. So literally we have entered, which is known as an era of radical uncertainty in which we are racing to craft appropriate responses to not only secure our health outcomes for all, but also to ensure that the lifestyles and livelihoods of people are protected. According to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, this would have an economic impact that will bring a recession that probably will have no parallel in the recent years. And he has also mentioned at one point of time that probably this is the most challenging crisis that we have faced since the Second World War. So, COVID-19, while posing very difficult challenges for the countries across the globe, has also opened doors for very fast-paced strategic thinking and action for responsive governments. However, we see that India has risen to the challenge to bring in some very landmark reforms across sectors in the current year. And in this current context, what I feel is that reimagining this approach from India in the post-COVID world is imperative to study. So basically, India has managed to embrace this threat very insightfully, and it still stands financially strong. It has also demonstrated its capable conduct in the midst of such an emergency by sending out the necessary medications to over around 150 countries across the globe who were fighting the pandemic. Apart from that, India has also helped the world to ensure the best recovery rates by sending its grassroots health system across the world. And not only that, we also have come to know that New Delhi has deployed its medical professionals in its global health engagements. The Indian military doctors we have seen has been sent out to many countries, Nepal, Maldives, Kuwait, to help people over there manage this viral pandemic. And the Indian medical staff has also been conducting online training for their counterparts from other SAARC nations. It has also played a very important role in Gulf countries, though there were certain criticisms in between, but overall we have seen how the world leaders have appreciated the Indian initiatives in the Gulf, which are very evident from the Twitter accounts of these world leaders. Though rather from the beginning of this crisis, the government in New Delhi has always focused, and compared to the other major powers of the world, it always recognized the need for a global engagement. This extensive global outreach has been a departure from the past when India tended to look at itself as a nation with very limited ability to shape global outcomes. So we can say that this new outward orientation is in tune with New Delhi's larger foreign policy approach, which is aimed at projecting India as a very responsible and a very reliable global stakeholder. Its proactive approach during this crisis, whether in terms of setting the global agenda or evacuating people in distress from the most infected areas to using its pharma heft for the global good, will have a very long-term impact on how the world will view this nation in the post-pandemic era. Indian responses may not have always been perfect, but it has certainly underscored that when needed, India can certainly rise up to the challenge of managing global crisis with a sense of purpose. On the economic front, India has managed to strike a balance between globalization and self-reliance. Apparently, as we all know, self-reliance is a concept that has been carried forward since the Cold War era and is often referred to as an economic nationalism. A nation's security should not be in danger due to excessive dependence on external resources. And keeping this in mind, the Prime Minister has always maintained that self-reliance can mean to be the strengthening of indigenous capacities and shall go hand in hand with globalization, which means that being self-reliant will never mean that you will cut yourself from the entire world. So thus, in this context, on 12th May 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while addressing the 95th annual plenary session of the Indian Chamber of Commerce, stressed upon the need to create an Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means a self-reliant India, and Indian government's Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative catalyzing reforms and enablers across areas like governance and laws around ease of doing business, then fast-tracking investment clearances through empowered group of secretaries, then also upgrading industrial infrastructure, private investment in mineral sector, commercial mining in coal sector, enhancing self-reliance in defense production, efficient airspace management, boosting private sector investment in social infrastructure, etc., was of course a very big step during such a crisis situation. And this momentum is what is required to be maintained to push the economy after such a great crisis. And apart from that, we also have COVID-19 being accelerating India's digital reset. The country was already on a digital first trajectory with one of the highest volumes of digital transactions in the world when the pandemic struck, and further propelled the use of contactless digital technology. According to the reports of the RBI that had come out on 5th August 2020, it showed that India is now clocking around 100 million digital transactions a day with a volume of 5 trillion rupees, which is equal to $67 billion, about 5 times a jump from that which was there in 2016. RBI also expects this to further grow fivefold to at least 1.5 billion transactions a day, worth 15 trillion rupees, which is equal to $200 billion. So much of this is right now being empowered by the United Payment Interface, which we call UPI lovingly, a real-time payment system developed by the National Payments Corporation of India and monitored by the RBI. And we see that such a digital reset by a country of 1.3 billion people is not only just a technological advancement, but more importantly, it is the foundation of a new mechanism for deliverance of goods and governances. And to expedite the process of this last mile connectivity of tech right up to the last consumer, Google has announced an additional $10 billion of investment in India in the next 5 to 7 years. Lastly, what we can say is that amidst such a serious crisis, the timely and difficult decisions taken by the Indian government demonstrated a very strong determination and political will of its leadership, so much so that even the 1.3 billion differing and factious Indians have to a great extent moved unified in a similar direction, demonstrating a national resolve. If political stability rests on pillars of democracy, it allows a nation to make difficult choices and sustain them with legitimacy. This was evident from the decision of a sudden lockdown during the initial days of the crisis that demonstrated the innate capacity and patience of a young nation like India to survive such troublesome occasions. None of India's adversaries should accept that the fear of an economic failure would ever prevent India from any kind of retaliation, be it economic or be it political or strategic. So the key profundity offered by its size, financial versatility, human resources, and democratic quality, all in all undergird the solidarity to accept such intense calls. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well done presentation. Actually, any questions? Now the house is open for questions and clarifications. So let me ask one question. Actually, you are very much appreciative of the policies devised by Government of India, even during the lockdown period, to attain the self-reliant India. But at the same time, you are skeptical about the inflation, that too at a much larger scale when compared to World War II, during the time of World War, okay?
Yes.
So why such kind of pessimistic note, that too at the beginning of this presentation, I would like to know.
Ma'am, basically what I think is that being positive is fine. Of course, we should always trust the government when the government is doing much to help us. We have seen throughout the lockdown era, everything is being done very specifically with keeping in mind the needs and requirements of all the classes of the society. But however, we cannot be blind about certain things. Like if you talk about inflation, we should not be blind about that. That is why I am not a blind blind supporter in that way. I am a researcher, so probably that is why probably I have looked at both the directions. I am not giving a verdict over here, but rather making an observation. So that is my take on your question, ma'am.
Okay. So I hope you are an economist to come out with such kind of.
No, ma'am, I am an international relations scholar. I research countering terrorism and international law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Anyway, so since no one else is having any questions to ask, let us go to the second presenter. Thank you very much. It was very well done.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm really honored.
Dr. Vishwajit Mohapatra, he entered in and where is he? I don't know at present. Otherwise, shall we start with Dr. Tridivesh Singh Maini, the faculty of Jindal Global University, on the liberal international order. Okay. And I hope you are aware that you can speak to a maximum of 12 minutes, maximum 10 to 12 minutes. That's the ideal presentation. Okay, over to you.
Actually, I'm at home, so there may be some connectivity problem. And let me start. I'm going to speak on the impact of liberal international, the impact of COVID-19 on liberal international order. So there are basically three basic challenges right now liberal international order is facing. First one is from neoconservative forces within the USA, in USA. Second one is US government policies itself. And third one is coming from these rising powers, especially revisionist rising powers. So before proceeding, I would like to shed some light on my conclusion first, then I will proceed systematically. So there are basically two theories that explains that may explain how COVID-19 may impact on liberal international order. First one, as hegemonic stability theory explains that international organizations or order, international organizations are main pillars of international order, and international are established by hegemon power, and with the decline of hegemon power, these international organizations also decline or die. And second one is liberal international theory that explains. And liberals believe that although international institutions are established by these hegemony power, but with the decline of hegemony of regional, these international institutions do not end. Rather, there are the rising powers within that international system take the leadership role, and the international institution as well as the international order continues. So I believe that even with the relative decline of US power, liberal international order is not going to die. These institutions are not. Rather, these rising powers will take leadership role. So let me begin with how I understand the liberal international order. Basically, to my mind, liberal international order is based on three principles, and I have called it foundation of liberal international order. Second one is economic foundation, and third one is democratic foundation of liberal international order. And international institutions or international organizations are base of this liberal order. And to my mind, there are challenges institutional foundation of liberal international order. First one is coming from the USA itself. The neoconservative forces and USA, they are retreating themselves from international organizations. And they have taken USA out of Human Rights Council, UNESCO. First, they have stopped financial contribution to UNESCO way back in 2011 and 2019. They came out of international this UNESCO, and later on in 2020 they come out of WTO, WHO, World Health Organization. So this basic idea of US retreat from liberal international order is a challenge. Second one is coming from China. China is a rising power, rising revisionist power more appropriately, and China is most likely to challenge the liberal international order among rising powers. China has so far, out of 15 specialized agencies of UN, China has taken leadership in 4 international organizations, 4 agencies. First one is Food and Agriculture Organization, International Telecommunication Organization, International Civil Aviation Organization, and International Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Before this, China was in leadership position of the World Health Organization from 2007 to 2017 for 10 years. And just China is utilizing the retreat of US from these international institutions. I will cite 2 examples. China has used the International Telecommunication Union's leadership to further Chinese technological giants' interest. For example, promotion of 5G technology of its company called Huawei. And another one is International Civil Aviation Organization. Chinese, under the Chinese leadership, this organization, ICAO, didn't update Taiwan on COVID-19 spread. And third problem, third challenge to international order is coming from redistribution of power. We are witnessing that with the spread of COVID-19, except for China, other economies are going to be registered negative growth rate. Rising powers are slightly less, but developed countries are more registering, more minus the economic growth. Because of this, power parity is going to breach, and with the bridging power parity between upholders of regional international order and rising power, these are going to demand for more say in international organizations in the form of reforming international organizations. And the second pillar is economic. On economic pillar, liberal international order is based on free market, free trade, free flow of goods and services, globalization, international interdependence, and consequent international interdependence. And this economic foundation is basically maintained by 2 international organizations, WTO and International Monetary Fund. The rise of protectionism is hampering this idea of free trade, free flow of goods and services. For example, USA and China are intensively engaged in trade war between 2. Both are imposing tariffs on each other, goods and services. China is engaged with Australia. They have imposed up to 80% tariff on barley import from Australia. India has imposed a palm oil import from Malaysia. So we are witnessing this kind of protectionism. And second one is WTO. WTO is the main facilitator of free trade and facilitator of international interdependence. But in last few days, few years, what we are witnessing is that the USA is using its veto power to paralyze WTO dispute settlement mechanism. there are 7 judges who execute on dispute between two states. But what USA is doing that they are consistently blocking entry of any judge, and there are at least three judges are necessary to function dispute settlement body. But due to US veto, the total strength of judges in this now December 2019 declined to one. Just one judge was there in WTO dispute settlement mechanism. And most comprehensive challenge to liberal two economic foundation of liberal international order is coming from Chinese initiatives like establishment of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and BRICS Bank. China's share in IMF, for example, has gone up from 4% to 6.411, and its position has risen to 6th to 3rd after USA and Japan. China is providing funding to states that were traditionally function of International Monetary Fund. International Monetary Fund used to fund states in time of crisis, but now what this function is being snatched away by Chinese-led International Infrastructure, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. For example, they have granted 750 million loan to Philippines, COVID-19 special loan. And again, they have granted around 92 million euro grants to Georgia. And basically, what its name suggests that it is Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But what they are doing, Georgia is not in Asia. We all know. So they are expanding in the crisis, in the time of crisis. This Chinese-led initiative is expanding its horizon from Asia to other areas as well. So it is posing a serious challenge. And third one is democratic foundation. So basically, there are not too much challenges to democratic foundation of a liberal international order, but there are few. For example, we have witnessed an emergence of surveillance state. State is asking their citizens, forcing them in the name of COVID to install ABC app, and how their privacy works. No one.
Excuse me, only 2 more minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So through this surveillance regime, the basic liberal attribute of freedom and privacy is being violated. And second one is, in the time of Corona, we are not sure when the basic idea of democracy, that is election, will be held. In time of crisis, states are facing challenge how to conduct elections, whether through ballot box, through email, or through postal. So there are problems. And another major challenge is with the rise of China. Chinese political and cultural values are going to provide an alternative of liberal way of life, liberal political system, liberal human rights mechanism. As we know that China has an authoritarian political system, single party, that is in contradiction to liberal value of multi-party system, or at least competitive party system and individual freedom. But Chinese way of human rights, that is often called as Asian value, puts society at a center instead of individual. They put social and economic rights at forefront, not individual rights. And these two things are in contradiction to, or just opposite to, liberal idea to put individual and political and civil rights at the forefront. So thank you. I think
yes, you kept the time properly. So thank you very much for the presentation. Now the house is open for questions and answers. So anyone would like to ask any question? Otherwise, again, I would be the one who. So actually, you spoke about the liberal international order and impact of COVID-19 on it. I would like to know Of course, you spoke in detail about, what all are the possible impacts and how the various international institutions got affected, etc. I'm very keen on knowing how India would likely to get affected due to this slight change in the liberal international order.
See, Indian political values, Indian economic values, and Indian social values are largely identical with liberal values. If there are some ruptures, I'm not ignoring it. Indian political system, even Indian human rights mechanism, is largely identical to or in similarity with liberal order. So, with the rise of China and Chinese values, political values, cultural values, India is at an opposite side. So if China is going to challenge, liberal so Indian values are also going to be challenged. Indian values are also going to be challenged. And traditionally, and especially in last couple of years, India is upholders of a rule-based system. So in my mind, India's interest lies with upholding of liberal international order, and even with rising disparity in terms of economic terms. So if India rises, it is not going to challenge liberal international order. Rather it is demanding, or it will demand accommodation rather than challenging the order per se.
Okay, so that's all. Thank you very much for the presentation, based on which you have thrown the light on the liberal international order, how it is getting affected due to COVID-19. Thank you. And now the next presenter, Dr. Bishwajit Mohapatra or Dr. Singh, whoever is available, please come forward and do the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Vikas. Yes. Dr. Tridivish Singh.
Yes. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my views on remittances in COVID-19 and the impact on remittances in South Asia. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So I am going to basically begin by just giving a brief overview of certain important figures, statistics which are important to understand this topic, and then I will look at specifically at the case of South Asia. Okay. So first of all, as we know, I mean, the COVID-19 has impacted every aspect of the economy in different parts of the world in different ways. And one of the major areas which has been hit is mobility of people. And one of the outcomes of globalization was obviously migration, and people went from different parts of the world. Migration was free, and especially if you look at the developing countries, there's been a rise migration over the past 3 to 4 decades. There has been a sudden rise. Now, specifically, if one were to look at the area of remittances, in 66 countries, remittances account for nearly 5% of the GDP. It is estimated that as a result of the COVID-19, there will be a global decline of about 20% in remittances. And in 2020, the remittances have been estimated at 445 billion. Now let us come specifically to the case of South Asia. If we look at South Asia, in certain countries, remittances account for a significant percentage of the GDP. I mean, this includes in Sri Lanka, for instance, remittances account for 8% of the GDP. In Bangladesh, again, in the region of 6 to 7%. Pakistan, 8%. PAL, it is estimated that the remittances account for anywhere between 25 to 30%. Some, even say that the remittances account for 1/3 of the GDP. And so basically in 2019, the South Asia as a whole received about 130 billion in remittances. India received the large chunk of these remittances, 79 billion, 83 billion USD it is estimated. This year it is estimated that India is going to get 64 billion USD, and remittances are going to drop by anywhere between 20% to 22% in as far as South Asia is concerned. Now, the large chunk of these remittances, they come from the GCC region, from the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. Now, if one were to look at the expat workers, see, there's a total of estimated 28 million expat workers in GCC, out of which 17 million are from South Asia, and out of which anywhere between 8 to 9 million are from India. And out of that, a large chunk, about 2 million to 2.5, according to conservative estimates, are from Kerala. This is before the pandemic. Then, of course, there's a number of workers have returned and so on and so forth. So these are just some important figures. And Bangladesh sends anywhere between 3 million to 4 million workers to the Gulf, to the GCC countries. Now, if one were to look beyond the figures specifically, now what are the reasons for remittances likely to be hit? At this point of time, obviously, there is a pandemic, so a large number of workers are returning home. I mean, in the case of India, this includes not just the state of Kerala, but Maharashtra, Telangana, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, from where in recent days, a large number of workers have been going to the Gulf. So the first thing is obviously the immediate cause which we are looking at this point of time is a pandemic. That for the workers want to return home because of safety. And also there have been questions with regard to, the health standards within GCC countries and what sort of situation basically the blue-collared workers are living in Gulf countries. So that is a major issue, and that has been taken up as well. But even before the pandemic, with the slowdown in Gulf countries, we had seen the return of already, states like Kerala had begun to witness a return of workers. And this, so, and post-pandemic also, it's not only because of, as a result of COVID-19, going to be the slowdown in GCC countries coupled up with the pandemic. And then we also see that, like the rest of the world, obviously GCC countries are becoming more insular. There is there is an effort to, reduce the number of expats. So for instance, recently, if those of us, have been following, if you look at Kuwait, in Kuwait, it has been, there has been recently a policy decision was made that not more than 15% of the population should be Indians. And a large chunk of the 9 million workers in the Gulf actually are in Kuwait. So similarly, in the case of Oman also, it has been decided recently that in government jobs, not more than 30 to 40% of people should actually be outsiders. So there are these policies which are being brought in place, and even before the outbreak of the pandemic, UAE and Saudi Arabia were beginning to bring laws which favored the locals. So I would say the pandemic plus a growing insularity plus the slowdown in these economies. And these economies are also basically looking to reduce now their dependence upon oil. They want to change the way they function. They're looking at a new paradigm. And while on the one hand, they want to reduce probably the number of blue-collared workers, at least in the short run, and probably they're looking at automation. But at the same time, interestingly, the GCC countries have given clear signals that they're open to professionals, especially expats, Western expats, and it remains to be seen, because in recent years, while the attention has been on blue-collared workers, in the case of countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, there has been a rise in the number of professionals going as well from South Asia. So this dynamic would be interesting, that how, post the pandemic, whether the GCC countries follow a similar approach towards white collared and blue collared workers. So this is something which we'll need to see. But coming back to the issue of remittances, we know the problems. What are the possible solutions? Now, the level of dependence of each South Asian country upon remittances is very different. Within countries also, each region has a different level of dependence. I mean, Kerala, for instance, is far more dependent than other states on remittances. If you look at the Kerala economy, it is far more dependent upon remittances. When you look at other South Asian neighbors of India, when you look at Nepal, when you look at Bangladesh, the solution naturally has to be different.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me an opportunity to chair the session. And I thank even Mr. Bavaskar also for providing me the opportunity. It was interesting experience. So thank you.
Distinguished chairs, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this session, I take great honor in proposing the vote of thanks on behalf of NICE to all those who have graced us with their presence and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. We would like to express a profound gratitude and sincere thanks to Dr. Dolly for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session productive with your questions. At last, I would like to thank the team behind the scenes of the Zoom room. Sumna, Sunaina, Anushka, Rafia, Saloni, Gayatri, and all other interns associated with NICE and all other members as well. Without all of you, this conference wouldn't have proven to be a great success. And of course, for creating this platform that brought experts, scholars, youth together on the same page. This is the last session of this Zoom room, and I would like you all to join the final session in the other Zoom room. Kindly tune in. Once again, this 3-day conference, we're truly honored to have you all with us this evening and hope to stay connected with you in future as well. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.